This podcast is intended for a mature audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome back to Legend of the Bones. Following in the footsteps of giants, Legend of the Bones is a chimera. A mix of old-school tabletop RPG and dark fantasy storytelling. As its name might suggest, in Legend of the Bones the dice rule. There'll be no rerolls, no fudging the dice, no metacurrency. The roll of the bones will determine the character's destiny, and no one will be spared their fate. None shall escape the destiny of bone. Last time on Legend of the Bones. The companions, along with Demelza and Adrift, entered the final chamber of Penmelkine, a vast temple-like space. Here, they discovered what they had long suspected, and the source of Penmelkine's corruption: the Rift, a tear in the barrier between the physical world and hell. Whilst Demelza had planned to cast the Eye of Krevik through the Rift, the ritual scroll found by Valen revealed that if a keeper sacrificed themselves along with their hellstone, then the rift could be sealed. Bound by a silent pact, Demelza approached the portal. The old mage would take her own life, and Valen would cast her body through the rift at the moment of death, in the hope that her soul would escape to the other world. Adrift, realizing her master's intent, tried to stop her, dragging Demelza back. Beric and Lena intervened, just as Talion succumbed to the rift's corruption, losing part of his soul. Then, in the chaos, a nightmare creature emerged from the rift. Nithog, the Hellworm, darkness incarnate in the form of a dragon. A brutal battle followed. All were scorched by Nithog's hellfire, but luck saw the Hellworm stunned as it crashed into a pillar whilst lunging for Lena, allowing the companions to gravely wound it. Victory seemed near, until Nithog turned once more on Lena, crushing her in its jaws and casting her aside, broken and near death. Believing Lena dead, Beric struck the final blow, driving Callus Cledder into Nithog's eye and slaying the Hellworm. But now we turn away from the companions and look once more to Canute and the crew of the Uvadraka in the wake of their clash with the Kraken. Chapter 68, Part 1, Day 64, Dawn. Party status: Canute, 40 out of 40 hit points. Raven, 32 out of 32 hit points. The Uvadraka, 51 out of 70 hull points. The crew, 33 out of 40 survivors. Distance to Clan Rhys, 120 miles. The sky burned with hues of purple, orange and red, even before the sun had breached the horizon. It painted the vast expanse of the Great Western Ocean like a sea of lava, burning, cruel and unforgiving. And for those that survived aboard the Uvadraka, it seemed as if the world was on fire. Yet survived they had. The Uvadraka, the Storm Dragon, had weathered the fury of the tempest. She had faced the Kraken, and though her hull was scarred and her timbers groaned with strain, she had endured. Her crew, blooded but breathing, had endured with her. But relief among the men soon gave way to a heavier truth. Weariness and sorrow settled over them like a shroud. 7 of their kin had fallen, spear brother and shield sister alike, bodies shattered, torn asunder, or swallowed whole by the Kraken's monstrous maw. One among them, Arn, had been dragged, screaming into the watery abyss, claimed by the sea, for an eternity. In the grim aftermath, the crew had made what repairs they could, but some wounds, wooden and human, would not be mended until they reached the sanctuary of a harbour. When all was done what could be done, the men took turns at the oars, rowing through the ink-black night. Canute, guided by Nordstjerna, steered them eastward, towards Llanrhys. Now, as the blazing orb of the sun pierced the eastern sky, Canute stood atop the steering platform, the wind lashing his hair and cloak. He gazed down the length of the ship, watching his men pull in slow rhythm, muscles taut, faces carved with fatigue and grief. Joy had fled them, leaving only the hollow echo of duty. Raven emerged, red-eyed and stiff, from beneath the makeshift tent at the midsection. Stretching like an old bear, he made his way towards the helm.
"Did you sleep?"
Canute asked as the old warrior approached.
"A little lot,"
Raven replied, his voice gravelled and low. Canute was not surprised. The image of Arn, Raven's nephew, being dragged beneath the waves, haunted him too. Perhaps the old warrior regretted holding his lord back from a futile rescue. Canute knew that Raven had saved his life. Had he leapt into the sea, it would have been self-slaughter. If Raven carried regret, he bore it in silence.
"You look tired, lord. You should rest."
His oathman offered, then added,
"I can take the oar."
It was true. Canute was spent. He had refused sleep, driven by duty, steering the Uvadraka through the long night. The weight of command pressed down on him like an anvil, unyielding, immense, but it was his burden alone. He nodded reluctantly, and Raven climbed to the helm. Canute surrendered the oar and stepped down from the platform. He paused, casting a glance back at the old warrior.
"What think you, Raven? How many days until we reach land? 2? 3, perhaps?"
Raven squinted into the blazing dawn and sniffed the salt-laced wind.
"That, lord, is in the hands of the gods."
Before the start of this episode, I referred to the basic expert rules for repairing ships. The rules state that while at sea, only half the lost hull points can be repaired, and that 5 crew can restore 1 hull point per turn. The Uvadraka had lost 39 hull points in the encounter with the Kraken, and with 35 crew aboard, including Canute and Raven, it took just 3 turns to restore 20 hull points. With the repairs complete, Canute will steer the ship once more towards Llanrhys, some 120 miles away. So time to make some rolls for day 64. Off mic, I already rolled for weather and got a 13, indicating that the day would be warm and fine. Wind direction. A 6. That's southwest. Not good news, as it means the sail cannot be lowered and the crew will need to row. I will rule that with fewer crew and the wind against them, the distance travelled will be 50 miles. Losing direction. A 3. The ship stays on course. Stumble upon. 11. Nothing. And finally, wandering encounter. A 6, so no encounter. That's all quite a relief. However, with everything that has happened, I think there has to be a possibility that Canute's leadership has been undermined. On that basis, I'm going to make a loyalty check to see whether the crew mutiny. With Canute's charisma of 15, ordinarily, his retainers would have a loyalty of 8. However, Skarne culture is built on oaths, and those that break such bonds are considered the very lowest of the low. In Skarne society, oathbreakers are shunned and despised. As such, I'm going to increase the crew's loyalty to 10, which means that only on a roll of 11 or 12 will the crew mutiny. Here is the roll. Okay then. Chapter 68, Part 2, Day 64, Afternoon. Party status. The party status is unchanged. Knut slowly roused from his slumber. His eyelids fluttered open with reluctance, the weight of the past few days heavy upon him. He did not want to wake. He yearned to remain in the sanctuary of sleep, lulled by the rhythmic sway of the Uberdrache as she sliced through the grey-green waves. But the memory of Arn crept into his thoughts unbidden. The stark terror etched into his oathman's face, and the bitter sting of his own impotence to save him. He began to doubt himself, to question his ability to lead. 11 men lost since they first departed from Trevenid, all those weeks ago. And whilst 2 were the recruits from Penglenau, it made no difference to the weight he bore. A good lord was not only a ring-giver, he was a shield, a bulwark against death, and in that sacred duty, Knut had faltered. He lay there, now fully awake, wrapped in the coarse warmth of his bearskin cloak. Outside the tent, the creak of timber and the steady splash of oars reached his ears. His men quietly fulfilling their duty. It was time that he fulfilled his own. He crawled out from the tent, fastening his sword belt around his waist and squinting into the piercing glare of the afternoon sun. Stepping between the row benches, he moved with deliberate purpose towards the steering platform. As he climbed up, Ravin met his gaze and offered a respectful nod. Knut extended his hand to take the oar.
Gather the men,
He commanded, his voice soft but firm.
I have something to say.
Ravin nodded once more, then strode down the length of the ship, his voice rising as he ordered the crew to cease rowing and assemble at the midsection. The men obeyed, gathering to listen to their lord. Curiosity flickered across their weather-beaten faces. Knut could feel his heart hammering in his chest as he waited for the last of them to turn their attention towards him.
My spear brothers, my shield sisters, you have served me loyally for many years, and some of you, my father before me.
Knut's voice rang out, carried above the wind.
And it has not been easy.
He acknowledged, his tone heavy with truth.
We all miss Scanvia. We all long for home. Some of you left wives, husbands, and children, family you have not seen in many years.
He let the words linger in the air, giving them the weight they deserved. The ache of longing was etched on many faces, eyes downcast in remembrance.
We have stood together, fought together. I would gladly have any one of you at my side in the shield wall.
A few of the men nodded approvingly, their expressions hardening with pride.
Each of you has given your oath, your solemn promise to row for me, to fight for me, to name my enemy as your enemy, and my friend your own.
Knut's gaze swept over them, steady and resolute.
In return, I give you my oath, to reward you with silver, and honor you with rings.
He paused, the silence pressing like a tide.
But a lord's duty is also to protect his oath sworn, and in that, I have failed.
The Northman looked from face to face, his eyes lingering on Ravin. but the old warrior's expression was unreadable.
So, if any among you wish to be released from your oath, without dishonor or enmity, speak now, and it shall be.
A hush fell over the ship, broken only by the whisper of the wind and the gentle murmur of the sea. A few of the men glanced at one another, uncertain, perhaps waiting for someone else to speak.
Lord,
Raven's voice cut the tension, and every man turned to hear the old warrior's thoughts.
you speak the truth. A lord's duty is to protect.
Canute felt his stomach twist, bracing for reproach.
And you have. For not one among us would be alive.
The old warrior spread his arms wide, gesturing to the crew.
If you had not bested Lord Conwyn in single combat.
There were murmurs of agreement, soft but growing.
You gave your oath, so your father would be worthy of Valhalla. And in doing so, you saved us all.
Raven turned now to face the gathered crew.
I, for one, hold to my oath. What say you?
Fists were thrown into the air, and the men erupted into cheers. Canute's lips curled into a broad grin. He descended from the steering platform and was met by firm hands and slaps on the shoulder. The fierce camaraderie of warriors bound by blood and honor. He approached Raven and clasped the older man's arm,
Thank you, my old friend.
then added with quiet gravity,
I am sorry. For Anna.
Raven shook his head.
Anna is fortunate.
He said, the corners of his mouth rising into a wry smile.
He drinks in Valhalla with your father. And one day, we shall join them also.
So with some equilibrium returned to the Uberdracker, it's time to make some rolls for day 65. Weather. 15. Warm and fine. Wind direction. A 2. Northeast. That is a stroke of luck. With the wind behind them, the crew can rest from rowing, and by the end of the day, all being well, they should make the coast of Llanrhys. Losing direction. A 4. They remain on course. Stumble upon. A 20! Wow! This could not have come at a better time. Canute and his crew will encounter or receive some boon. And finally, wandering encounter. A 2. An encounter is indicated. It seems to me that combining that stumble upon and the wandering encounter would make sense. I wonder. Do they encounter another Skarne ship? Let's ask the Oracle. A 5. That's a straight yes. Does the ship serve Einar? A 6. That's a yes and. Well, that result is emphatic. So the logical question is this. Is Einar himself aboard? Another 6. And another yes and. Well, after much ill fortune, it seems the dice gods are back on Canute's side. Chapter 68, Part 3, Day 65, Morning. Party status. The party status is unchanged. In the hush of night, the wind shifted. The obstinate southwesterly that had thwarted their journey sighed its last breath, dissolving into a ghostly calm that blanketed the sea in the small hours. In the blackness of night, the vast constellations wheeled overhead, while the Uverdracker drifted in solitude, a dark silhouette, alone upon an endless mirror. But with the ashen light of dawn, the silence broke. A brisk wind stirred from the northeast. The Uvadraka's great square sail was unfurled, snapping hungrily and billowing wide to drink in the breeze. The ship leapt forward, slicing through the water with renewed purpose. White-crested waves curled and frothed at the prow, flung aside in glittering arcs as the vessel surged ahead. Freed from the oars, the crew's mood lightened. Laughter rang out across the ship, voices raised in jest and song, their lost humour found once more. The sun climbed higher, casting golden warmth, and with the fair weather came a rekindled hope, fragile but growing. As the miles of ocean passed beneath them, Canute stood lost in thought. He had planned to trace the eastern coast of Llanrhys, having reached its southern tip, but the storm had rewritten that course. Now it seemed that they would make landfall from the north instead. Perhaps Einar had done the same, if he had indeed sailed from Scanvia. Their homeland lay far to the north, a land of fjords and frost, and though Canute clung to the hope of finding his uncle, the Skarne gods were fickle, more likely to test a man than to guide him. His mind wandered to the runes Ravin had cast before their departure from Penglenow. Had Einar come seeking a bride to beget him an heir? If so, why had he come to Llanrhys? Why not wed the daughter of another Jarl, closer to home? The logic eluded him. More troubling was how a new bride and the prospect of a legitimate heir might alter Einar's feelings towards Beric, a bastard son hitherto unknown to him. The hours passed. The sun had reached its zenith, then began its slow, golden descent to the west. By mid-afternoon, a thin strip of land appeared through the blue haze of the horizon. Relief surged through Canute. The storm had driven them far from their intended course, and their provisions had dwindled dangerously low. Land meant survival, even if that meant raiding some poor, unsuspecting Wayland village. Better still, they would find a friendly port, open to trade. The Uvadraka was in need of repairs, and raiding always came with the risk of losing men. With the sun now behind them, the view ahead sharpened. The coastline resolved into jagged cliffs and rocky inlets. Beyond were dense forests that climbed into rolling hills, and further still, the snow-dusted crowns of distant mountains. He summoned Ravin to the helm, and yielded the oar to the older man, who adjusted their course southward. Under Ravin's sure hand, the Uvadraka clung to the rugged coast, and with luck, they would find a place to make harbour before nightfall. The two stood in silence, the wind tugging at their cloaks and tangling their hair. Canute's gaze lingered on the distant shore, and his mind drifted backwards across the years to the last time he had set foot upon Llanrhys.
Lord, look.
Ravin's gruff voice tore Canute from his reverie. The older man was pointing ahead, for there, having just appeared from behind a rocky promontory, was a Skarne longship. Canute squinted into the distance, hardly believing his eyes, for it was a vessel he knew all too well. The Vindnadra, the Wind Viper, Einar's ship. Dramatis Personae, Canute, 9 years ago. Canute had seen 18 summers when he embarked on his first great voyage. He had already stood in the shield wall, fighting alongside his father against a rival Jarl. But this was different. Jarl Harold had proclaimed that he would lead ships to harry the Wayland coast, a land famed for its abundance of gold and silver, as well as the hardiness of its people. Harold had promised rich rewards, and there were many eager hands to take up spears to fight in his name. His father's cousin, Jarl Einar, had advised against it. He warned that the Wailer were wild folk, and no easy prey. Better to trade, Einar had said, else look for a soft monastery in Bernica or Wessas. Einar was no coward, and his reputation as a warrior could not be denied, but he was ever the more level-headed of the two Jarls, who had grown together like brothers. Harold was too proud to back down though. His stubbornness was matched only by his thirst for adventure. He laughed away Einar's objections, told him he had become soft, ever since he had fallen for some sass girl he had humped as a youth. Einar ignored the slight. Whatever the truth, he agreed to go, for Harold had asked him to take his son upon his ship, the Vind Nadra, and have him fight beside him. Canute loved the man he called his uncle. He was clever, generous, and had an easy humour. Men respected him. He commanded their loyalty, not through fear, but with quiet authority.
An oath must be earned,
he told Canute, as they looked out one morning from the Vind Nadra's steering platform, the salt-tinged breeze ruffling his dark locks.
and it is a gift to be cared for.
After a week at sea, the jagged coast of Llanrhys finally loomed into view, and soon they came ashore beneath the shadow of a headland, dragging their ships on the sands of a sheltered cove. The Skarne travelled quickly inland, burning and pillaging as they went, black banners of smoke heralding their arrival. And such deeds ever summon a swift vengeance. On a wind-swept plain, beneath a hill fort, the local warlord came forth with his host. 200 men or more, their helmets and spears gleaming dully under a clouded sky. In the front rank were the Prytany, the Painted Ones, warriors, naked but for torques of silver or gold worn about their necks. Their bodies were daubed with swirling patterns of blue woad, while their lime-bleached hair was spiked with goose fat. They were a fearsome sight, men who were undaunted by injury or death, men who lived only for the glory of battle. Canute stood shoulder to shoulder with Einar, shields overlapping, waiting for the inevitable charge. His stomach felt sour, his mouth parched, and for a moment he thought to be overwhelmed by the desire to turn and flee.
You have trained for this.
Einar's voice was calm, reassuring, recognizing the fear that every man felt before battle.
Trust your instinct.
So confident were the Wailer that even their women and children had come to watch from the slopes beyond. Their chieftain, a broad man adorned in mail and a gilded helm, sat astride a snorting horse. Raising his blade, he bellowed a great war cry that rolled like thunder across the field. The Prytany answered, charging forward, shrieking blood and fury in their melodic yet guttural tongue. For a heartbeat, the Skarne line wavered before 100 crazed and naked warriors streaming towards them. But while they were outnumbered, the Skarne had greater discipline. Jarl Harold had roared above the din to hold the shield wall, promising a rich reward for the man who felled the most foes. Then, the enemy was upon them. There was a crash as limewood shields collided. The Skarne stepped back as one, letting the Wailer momentum falter. Several of the Prytany stumbled, trampled underfoot by their own. Then steel met flesh, hewn and pierced by sword, axe and spear, and the air was filled with screams. A painted warrior lunged at Canute, eyes wild, spittle flying from his long moustached lips. His sword glanced off Canute's shield, and in a blur of instinct, the young Northman thrust his own blade forward. steel found belly. He felt the gush of hot blood on his hands as he twisted the blade, ripping it upwards and sawing through flesh. The man screamed as he fell, bowels spilling out on the blood-soaked ground. Another stepped up in his place, seeking to split Canut's skull in vengeance. The Northman's guard was down from killing the other man. The warrior's blade came hurtling towards him, only to be pushed aside by Einar's shield. Canute whipped his sword up, taking the man's throat in a mist of blood. The man in the shield wall to the left of Canute suddenly dropped, his head split by a Wayland axe. He was suddenly exposed, expecting to feel the sharp bite of steel. Then Arn appeared in the space beside him, roaring a challenge, and thrusting his spear at the enemy. All around, men were dying. The air was filled with the stench of blood and excrement. Within a few minutes, the field was littered with dozens of dead, Whaler and Skarne alike, though the Whaler had the worst of it. Then, like the turning of the tide, the enemy broke, and with it came the slaughter. The enemy turned and fled, and the Skarne surged after them, howling. Men were felled like wheat beneath the scythe. The bloodlust was now among the Northmen as they pursued their quarry. Seeing his warriors being butchered, the warlord spurred his horse forward, desperately trying to halt the rout. He rode into the nearest pursuers, running down 3 of the invaders, before being thrown from his horse as the beast's stomach was ripped open by a Skarne spear. He fell heavily and was quickly beset, pierced by multiple spears, until Ravin split the man's torso with his great axe. By then, panic had seized the watchers on the hill. Women and children fled, screaming in their grief for their fallen husbands, brothers and fathers. Screams which turned to terror as they were caught by men whose blood was hot for the spoils of war. Canute moved to join them, but Einar gripped him by the shoulder, holding him back. The young Northman spun to meet his uncle's gaze, and noticed that none of Einar's men had followed in pursuit. For a moment, Einar held him with a stare. Then he stooped and pulled a fine silver arm ring from a severed limb. He offered it to Canute.
Kill your enemies in the shield wall. Claim their silver. But remember this. For good or ill, a man is judged by his reputation.
Back in episode 58, Ravin read the runes, and from that, Canute inferred that Einar had come to Llanrhys seeking a bride to beget him an heir. It's time to ask the Oracle whether that is indeed true. A 4. That's a yes but. So that was indeed Einar's intent, though that but suggests he has not been successful. Chapter 68, Part 3, Day 65, Afternoon. Party status. The party status is unchanged. Canute climbed up upon the Uvadraka's prow, his boots planted on either side of the hull. His fingers gripped the carved dragon's head, steadying himself as the ship rose and fell upon the restless sea, the cold spray stinging his face. Ahead, the Vindnadra had, by now, sighted them. Her helmsman had altered her course, her dark silhouette cutting through the pale foam as she turned to intercept. With the wind now against her, her sail had been drawn up tight, and her long oars dipped and rose in rhythmic unison, flashing briefly in the sunlight, before plunging again into the deep. Ravin barked an order, and the Uvadraka's own sail was furled. The crew moved swiftly to the benches, the creak of wood and the splash of oars joining the song of wind and sea. Canute paid no heed. His gaze was fixed on the dark-haired figure across the water, who mirrored his stance with an easy confidence, a broad grin splitting his weathered face. Einar waved, his arm swinging high, and soon the two ships drew alongside one another. The gap between them narrowed to nothing but the slap of waves, and it struck Canute then just how much Beric resembled his father. The same sharp jawline, the same unruly black hair, and most of all, Einar's eyes, a startling blue, bright as forget-me-nots in spring. Ropes were thrown, caught and fastened. The two vessels groaned as they were pulled together. With the ease of long practice, Einar leapt across the gap, landing solidly upon the Uverdrakker's deck. He clasped Canute in a fierce embrace, the smell of salt and pine pitch clinging to his clothes, then held the younger man by the shoulders.
Well now, Canute Haraldsson, how is it that Lord Conwyn has left you off the leash?
There was a playful humour in his voice, a teasing warmth of reunion.
It is good to see you too, Uncle.
Canute replied, jovially at first, then his tone grew sober, the weight of purpose pressing behind his words.
As it happens, I have been seeking you.
Einar raised a brow, his grin fading to curiosity.
You have? Then we have much to discuss.
He observed, then clapped Canute heartily on the back, laughter rumbling in his chest.
But tell me first, what in the name of the gods have you done to your ship?
Canute gave a short, dry laugh, shaking his head.
You would not believe it if I told you. But that can wait.
The Northman's expression hardened. The sea breeze seemed to still as he met Einar's gaze, voice lowering.
I have come to tell you that you have a son.
The words struck Einar as though he had been hit. The humour drained from his face, replaced by disbelief. His jaw tightened, and he shook his head slowly.
You are mistaken.
No.
Canute insisted, his eyes never wavering.
You told me that you once loved a girl. Brea.
Brea.
Einar repeated the name, the sound barely a whisper, as though afraid it might vanish with the wind.
She had a son. Your son. And he needs your help.
Thank you for listening to Legend of the Bones. I hope you've enjoyed the show. If you like what you've heard, then please consider rating and reviewing the show in your podcatcher of choice. Not only do I love seeing the feedback, but it really does help the show to reach new listeners. As always, where would I be without my amazing cast of voice talent? Returning to the show after a long gap, playing the role of Einar, is J. Brandon Payne. Brandon is a professional voice actor and musician who graciously agreed to appear on the show. Also returning, in his usual role of Canute, is my comrade in arms, John Cohen, creator of Tale of the Manticore. My sincere thanks to both Brandon and John. Your contributions have really elevated this episode, and I am, as always, incredibly grateful. I'll put Brandon and John's links in the show notes. You can also help by liking or reposting new episode announcements, or by recommending the show online or to a friend. You really can't beat the power of word of mouth. Alternatively, if you would like to show your appreciation by buying me a metaphorical cup of tea, then I have a Ko-fi page at ko-fi.com/Legend of the Bones. Any donations will go towards the show's running costs. Finally, I would love to know what you think of the show, and I do respond to every message I receive. So with that in mind, you can contact me on X at Legend Bones, Blue Sky at Legend Bones, Mastodon at legendbones, at ttrpg-hangout.social, Instagram at legendofthebones, email at legendofthebones@gmail.com, or go to legendofthebones.blogspot.com for show notes, house rules, character profiles, art, maps and more. Join me next time to find out what awaits our adventurers as the bones decide their fate. None shall escape the destiny of bone.
Hi, I'm Trevor Stevenson, and I'd like to invite you to join me for Your Story Will Be Different, a narrative play podcast telling the stories born from playthroughs of solo tabletop role-playing games. Genres for episodes will range from science fiction to fantasy to horror and beyond. Come for the TTRPGs and stay for all the drama, pulse-pounding action, gruesome monsters, and life-changing heartbreak. Episodes will drop every other week wherever you get your podcasts. I'm super excited to share these stories with you, but more importantly, I want you to check these games out for yourself, because as fun as these games were for me, your story will be different.